Hello, I'm Jack Grady, and on behalf of the Archives and History Committee of the First Baptist Church on the Square in LaGrange, Georgia, we welcome military veteran Bob Davis, and we thank Bob for his service to our country, and we're pleased that he is now a member of our church, having moved here several months ago. Bob, welcome, and thank you for your presence and for your participation in this project.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Well, Bob, we want to talk a little bit about your military experience. I know it stretched over quite a long period of time, but you were in the Navy. Mm-hmm. So I know most of every Navy man, particularly an enlistee, as you were, I believe.
Yes.
Begins with boot camp. Tell us a little bit about your boot camp experience and where it was held.
I joined the Navy on September 9th, 1954. And
54?
Yes.
1954.
And I was sent to boot camp at Great Lakes Recruit Training Command in Illinois, and spent 9 weeks, in boot camp.
Yep. Quite an experience, I'm sure.
Yes, it was. Very interesting. And it was unlike anything that I had ever experienced before.
Where were you living when you were enlisted in the Navy?
I was born and grew up in a small town in the mountains of East Tennessee called Etowah.
Etowah, Tennessee. Mm-hmm. Okay, near Chattanooga?
Yes.
Yes, good. So here you are now, about 18 years old?
17.
17. Mm-hmm. And off you go to boot camp with a group, I imagine.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about boot camp experience.
It was unlike anything that I had ever experienced before. The regimentation, the discipline, the hard work was all new to me, but I was fortunate that one of the first things that our company commander said was, "Can anyone run a typewriter?" Oh. And I raised my hand, and that sort of changed my whole future.
That one thing?
That one thing.
Wow. That's interesting. We'll have to find out a little bit more about that as we go along. So you're in boot camp now. What was what you say was one of the most difficult experiences you had in boot camp?
Physical training, marching and marching and marching, and hard work, little sleep,
yes.
But it was for a purpose.
Sure.
To instill discipline, and I think it worked out.
I shouldn't ask you this, but did you ever have to climb a rope as a part of your training? I'm talking about one hanging from the ceiling.
Yes.
You did? You
yes.
did. I say that because that was probably my most difficult experience in boot camp when I was a young sailor. I had a hard time climbing that rope.
Oh.
I could do most everything else.
Yes, it takes lots of upper body strength to do that.
It really does. Okay, so boot camp continues, and you do a lot of marching, and you probably went to the rifle range.
Oh yes, I did what everyone else does, but because I could run a typewriter, they made me the company clerk.
Okay.
Which really got me out of quite a few things, because I was back pounding on this old manual Underwood typewriter, which had been there since.
Instead of standing watch at
yes,
some place.
Yes, I was lucky for that one reason.
Yeah. Well, good. So boot camp was 9 weeks.
9 weeks.
9 weeks. And then where did you go from there?
I went to San Francisco,
right away.
to Treasure Island, and from there I was assigned to a destroyer which was homeported in Long Beach, California, and I went down there in I guess it was February or March of 1955, and I went aboard the USS Trathan, DD 530, which was an old World War II destroyer.
I can picture it.
And again, when I was interviewed for an assignment, or to be assigned
aboard ship.
After I did my little tour chipping paint and then working in the galley as a mess cook, which everyone had to do.
I see.
When you first went aboard. Again, when I finished mess cooking, they said, well, where would you like to work? I said, I run a typewriter. And they say, good, you're going to be in ship's office, which sort of set my career in motion. So I was in ship's office in addition to standing watches and do all the other things that sailors do. But it was the beginning of a career in Navy administration.
Naval administration. Now, this was in 1955, Bob, I believe. The Korean War had pretty well wound down by that time.
Right.
And there was no Vietnam War yet. That was yet to happen. So this was peacetime Navy. But you went through procedures there to advance yourself. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I was fortunate that I had a knack for taking tests.
Taking tests. Most people detest that.
Yes. So I was fortunate in that each time I took the test for advancement, I was selected on the first try. So while on the destroyer, I made third-class petty officer as a personnel man. And after 2 years aboard the Trathan, we got a message saying that they were looking for volunteers in my category to go to the Commander Cruiser Destroyer Force Pacific, which was in San Diego, California. And so I applied and was immediately chosen to go. And at almost the same time, I became eligible to go to shore duty.
Shore duty. Okay.
So I went down to San Diego and was assigned to the staff of Commander Cruiser Destroyer Force Pacific, and they put me in the personnel division where we made personnel assignments to all of the destroyers and cruisers in the Pacific Fleet.
Wow.
But I only stayed there a few months because I got a set of orders to go to shore duty.
Shore duty.
So in guess it was January, February of 1956, I guess it was.
56 probably.
No, excuse me, 57. I got orders to the U.S. Naval Training Center in Bainbridge, Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And I reported there and was assigned to the personnel department. And I was assigned to the the department where people checked into the people who were being transferred in and out came through the personnel department.
So. It all happened, I mean, there. You kept tabs on that and did all of the administrative detail, I guess, related to personnel moves.
Right. And my particular section was responsible for record keeping. And we had every command in the whole Navy has a running record of the events that happen, and you every day you create what's called a diary of events that happened, and the names of the people who come in, the names of people who have left, and any other significant things that happen. Yeah. And those records are, in those days, were typed on an old manual typewriter and then sent to a higher command, which eventually ended up on microfilm and is still in the records in St. Louis.
Wow.
And of course that's true of every command in all the services, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably.
So
this is like 2 years after you enlisted.
Yes.
This is happening in 57.
Right. And so I stayed there for 4 years.
Okay.
Got married along the way. And
very significant.
I got promoted to second class petty officer, then first class petty officer. And at the end of that 4 years, I was transferred to an aircraft squadron at the Naval Air Station, Virginia Beach, Virginia. And that was Attack Squadron 86. And our ship that we were assigned to when we deployed was the USS Independence, CVA 62, which at the time was a brand new ship.
Carrier?
Aircraft carrier. Yes.
Wow.
And so I made 2 deployments on Independence with Attack Squadron 86, and then about the end of the second year, I was promoted to Chief Petty Officer.
Chief, made Chief. Man, that's moving fast.
I was very fortunate. The advancements during that period of time came quickly. So I was a very young Chief Petty Officer, which was interesting.
I'll bet. I'm sure it was.
But after I made Chief in this particular squadron, they did not have a billet for a Chief Petty Officer in my specialty, so I was transferred to Fighter Squadron 41 at the same base and deployed on the same ship, the Independence.
Okay.
But they had a brand new airplane called the F-4 Phantom, which was...
I read a little about it.
the latest in fighter aircraft. And
that carrier must have had a huge complement of personnel.
yes, it did. It had about 2,000 crew.
Wow.
And then when the ship deployed and they brought all the aircraft squadrons aboard, you ended up with around 4,000
My goodness.
people on board.
It's mind-boggling to me.
Because there would be several aircraft squadrons of various types, which would deploy on that particular carrier.
Yes. And you were part of that ship's complement.
No, I was in the squadron.
Yeah,
I was in
but
the
I thought
aircraft
that was-
squadron, and the
It was separate from then the ship's complement.
yes,
Okay.
and when we would deploy to the Mediterranean for a 6-month cruise or a 9-month cruise, and then when we came back home, we would leave the carrier and go back to the Naval Air Station
see.
At Virginia Beach, which was our home port.
I see. Okay.
So at the end of that sea tour, I got a set of orders to the San Francisco Bay Naval Shipyard. So back to the West Coast in San
one coast to the
Francisco.
other.
And
But you were a chief now by this time.
I was a chief.
And so what were you doing in this new assignment there on the West Coast?
I was assigned to the personnel office.
I see. Okay.
And
Similar responsibilities.
yes,
to what you- okay.
in my specialty. And after a year, I guess, maybe not quite a year, the officer that I worked for was a Navy lieutenant. He was a limited duty officer because he had been a former enlisted man and in the same field, administration. And
Had a similar career path to yours.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And after about a year, I guess, he insisted that I apply for the warrant officer program, which was just being reintroduced into the Navy.
Yeah.
So I applied for the warrant officer program and was selected in the first class
Boy.
of new warrant officers.
Great.
So away I went to officer candidate school in Newport, Rhode Island.
Oh, boy.
And which was very interesting because there are so few warrant officers left in the Navy from World War II. They really didn't know what to do with us because the program had been dormant for quite a long time. So they said, well, this is officer candidate school, so we're going to put you through the program that brand new ensigns right out of college go through, and we're going to teach you all the things we teach them. Well, they gave us a stack of books this high, and we went back to our assigned quarters, and we looked at the books, threw them under the bed, and never looked at them
really?
again,
Yeah.
because all of the new warrant officers had all of that technical knowledge as senior enlisted men, and it was...
You'd achieved it in a different way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the instructors that taught us were new officers themselves who had just been through the officer candidate school not long before that, and so they had a tough time because whatever they were teaching us, these new warrant officers who had been senior enlisted people in that segment knew so much more than these young officers that were trying to teach us things like navigation and that sort of thing. So after about 3 classes, the Navy said, there's no need for us to send these people to officer candidate school. They know more than the instructors do. So they started making direct appointments then. And when you got promoted to warrant officer, you put on the uniform and went to sea without having to go to OCS.
I've always been told that warrant officer position is a very, very powerful one in the Navy, and a very important one.
Well, they are highly respected, and it was. I was very proud to have been in the first class.
First class.
That in the reinstituted program after World War II.
Okay, good. Well, as you said, whoever was in charge of that realized that they made a mistake when they did away with that program after World War II, and had to go through the steps of reactivating that hold.
Right.
And you were part of the results of that, and that's good. Very commendable of you.
Right.
And the way that you came through it.
At the when I graduated from the warrant officer school, I was assigned to the USS Oriskany, CVA 34, which was an old World War II carrier, which was still in commission. And by then, things had started to heat up in Vietnam.
Okay, I was hoping that you'd lead into that Vietnam period, because you were involved during that period of time, weren't you?
Yes. I reported aboard Oriskany. Well, we moved to San Francisco. I reported aboard Oriskany, and immediately we deployed to Vietnam.
Wow.
And for which was to be scheduled to be a 6-month rotation. And
in a nutshell, can you tell us what was going on in Vietnam at that time?
Well, the fighting was very intense, and the North Vietnamese had invaded the South, and there was just lots of combat, and the Americans were not faring too well. But our ship was sent up off the coast of North Vietnam, and our aircraft and pilots were flying strikes against Saigon and
Hanoi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not Saigon, but Hanoi, which was the capital of North Vietnam.
Yes.
And fighting was very intense. We had lost several aircraft and pilots, and during that time, it was interesting. John McCain, who's later to become senator, John
Yes.
McCain was in one of our squadrons.
Oh, he was.
And
John McCain was in one of your squadrons.
Yes.
Aboard your ship. And he was shot down.
He was shot down and imprisoned for the whole period of time. We had lost too many pilots, including an officer and a friend of mine that I had been stationed with back earlier in Virginia Beach. He was shot down, and he parachuted out, landed on top of a karst ridge, and was okay. And we were in communications with him, and but he was surrounded by North Vietnam, Vietnamese soldiers, and he said, "Look, I'm stuck here, and they're all around me." And so the Air Force sent in a helicopter, a rescue helicopter, which was called the Jolly Green Giant. They came in to extract him, and unfortunately, the North Vietnamese shot down that helicopter.
Oh, my goodness.
And this officer said, "Look, I don't want to get anybody else killed. I'm going to give up." So he was captured, and instead of taking him back and to prison like they did John McCain, they just killed him.
Oh, my.
So that was very traumatic for me, because
wow.
He was a good friend. I had served with him before, so that was a real tragic incident.
Sure. Absolutely. And you never forget those experiences.
Yes. And then later, we had a terrible accident aboard the ship. We had been scheduled to fly the night shift, but we ran into some rough weather, so they did not fly. So they had all of this ordnance, the bombs and rockets and all that stuff already on the aircraft, so they had to download them. And there were two young sailors who were putting these flares, these magnesium flares, back into the storage room, which happened to be just about 40 feet from my stateroom. And about 6:30 in the morning, they had an accident.
Oh, Bob.
And the two young sailors, one of these flares went off while they were handling it.
Gee.
And magnesium burns at 4,500 degrees. And these two kids panicked, and all they had to do was take the rocket out and throw it over the side. But they panicked and threw it into the locker where there were 600 more of those flares. And so that created terrible explosion. Fire was everywhere, and it happened that I had just gotten out of my bunk and did my morning ablutions, and because the space was so small, my roommate had to wait until I got out in order for him to have room to get up. And as I was finishing up, fire quarters sounded, and I opened my stateroom door, and there was just thick smoke everywhere. And by then my roommate had gotten up, and I said, come on, let's get out of here. And unfortunately, he stopped to comb his hair. And anyway, I got out. I saw the smoke was everywhere, and the explosions were going on, and I saw 7 officers and one of them I worked directly with, the senior chaplain, the senior medical officer, the air wing commander, the personnel officer. They were making their way aft on the other side of the ship, and from all my training and everything that I should have done, I should have gone with them. But for some reason, and I know this sounds trite, but I heard a voice that was so plain. And this voice said, go up.
Go up.
Go up.
Instead of over with those. Go up.
And I went up. Those 7 officers.
Went up on deck?
They never made it. They couldn't get out on the hangar deck, so they went into a head or a bathroom and turned the water on, the shower, which is what you're supposed to do. But all 7 of them died in that room. And my roommate stopped to comb his hair, and he died in our room. I went up, and I had only been aboard the ship a very short time, and I really didn't know my way around up there. And there was
it's a huge ship.
Yes.
It takes a while to get
there. Was a young sailor who was at his fire station. He was putting on an oxygen breathing apparatus, and I said, how do I get out of here? He said, go right through there on the forecastle. I went through that door. It saved my life.
Amazing story, Bob.
And that young man who directed me, he died right there at his station.
Goodness. And
in total, we lost 44 of my shipmates.
44 shipmates. Wow, what an experience.
Yeah,
and then I guess your ship had to be in dry dock for a long period of time.
There was lots and lots of damage. So we came back to the States, and we had been in San Francisco, and I had asked to be assigned to a ship homeported in San Diego because I really wanted to show my wife Southern California. Well, that's how I was assigned to this particular ship, which was homeported. But on the way back, because of all the damage, and we had to go into the shipyard, they changed the home port from San Diego to San Francisco, and they came into the shipyard that I had just left. So we stayed in San Francisco until my rotation. And Then from there, I was assigned to the Navy Supply Corps School in Athens, Georgia.
Athens, Georgia. Mm-hmm. And that's how you all ended up in Athens, I presume.
Yes.
Yeah, I see.
Yes. And we raised our children there. We were there for 37 years. I retired from the Navy in Athens, and
after 23 years in the Navy.
After 23 years,
yeah,
yes.
23 years. Okay, go ahead. Excuse me. You retired then in Athens.
Yes.
Okay.
And I was fortunate in that they held my retirement ceremony at 8:30 in the morning, and I went to work as a civilian at 10 o'clock. I didn't want to lose the day's pay. So I worked in the apparel industry for another 23 years.
Apparel, clothing.
We manufactured women's wearing apparel.
Ladies wearing apparel.
Ladies.
Yeah.
And
then you decided to come to LaGrange, Georgia. What brought you to LaGrange?
Well, we had raised our children, and they had gone to the university, and our daughter married a young man from Athens, and when they graduated, he got a job with Interface Corporation, and they moved to LaGrange.
Yes.
And they've been here ever since. Yeah. And
oh, boy. Good.
Eventually, after our children married and moved away, and we were getting older, and it became time for us to go be near our children.
Yes.
So that's what brought us to LaGrange.
Well, I can relate to that. Sure, that's good. That's great. Well, you had a wonderful experience. Some of it wasn't wonderful, but you had a meaningful experience.
Yes.
And you did your service to our country, and you did it well. And I'm, as an enlisted Navy guy myself for a short term, I was in the tail end of World War II. Mm-hmm. So when it was over, I was over too. I wanted to get on with my life. But you spent 23 years in the Navy, and you started when you were 17 years old. I guess you had to have your parents sign for you?
Yes.
In order to do that, because normally it's 18, unless your parents do sign off and approve it. But you went from a 17-year-old enlistee to a Navy lieutenant?
Yes.
You moved through the ranks. That's fascinating to me, and certainly impressive. All of those petty officer movements up the ladder, and then the crowning part of that was your warrant officer experience. But from then on, it was a Navy officer.
Yes.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much for your willingness to come and share your story with us. I think perhaps you know that this is a church-wide project, and we are nearing the end of it, except that maybe it'll never end, because as people like you move in, we want to certainly include them if we possibly can. And I'm so glad that you did come and join our church. You're very involved, I know, in Sunday school now and our senior adult ministry, and we appreciate that. I wanted to mention that our technical expert is Paul Barnes, and he's up in the booth doing the actual recording today, as you know. And Paul will make 4 copies of this DVD that he's doing. One copy will be kept in the Heritage Room, we call it, that's where the Archives and History Committee maintains its presence here in the church. They'll keep a copy of that on their files, in their files. A copy will go over to the church library. People, members of our church, friends, they can check that out just like they would a book and look at the DVD at home if they wish, and then bring it back, of course, like a book that they check out. Our museum on Main here in LaGrange, just down the street here in downtown LaGrange, they've asked to be allowed to keep a copy in their archives for anyone who might be interested in exploring this story, these interviews that we're doing. And of course, the fourth copy will go to you, for you to keep, maintain at home. So that's pretty much the story. I know it was an emotional part of this experience this morning was telling the story of your friends aboard ship. I just recently read a book about something about the last of the tin cans. These are, you know, the ships, those tenders, smaller ships that work around, help the aircraft carriers, and particularly, as I've understood it. But the story is about the battle in the Philippines back during World War II. Lady, and I can't remember the name of the island that was right next to that battle, but it was a fierce one. The Japanese lost about 10 or 12 ships. We almost lost that many. But it was just before MacArthur went back to the Philippines, and they were to be involved in escorting him back when they got into this fierce battle there in the Leyte area, right in the middle, Strait of San Bernardino?
Yes.
I believe it is. I went through that strait one time on our ship. I was on a transport. We were bringing people home mostly, and it was immediately after World War II. But I remember that long voyage through. Took us about 3 days to go through the Philippines to wind our way through. Well, Bob, thanks so much again. Best wishes to you, sir.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.